3 people are dead and several others are sick following a suspected Hantavirus outbreak on a cruise ship in the Atlantic Ocean. The vessel, the MV Hondius, is currently anchored off Praia, the capital of Cape Verde. This demographic breakdown shows the 149 people remaining on board, which includes 17 Americans. Under observation by the World Health Organization, passengers are strictly prohibited from disembarking. Because the ship remains isolated and health authorities are managing the containment on site, officials have determined that broader travel restrictions are not necessary. This timeline tracks the onboard fatalities, beginning on April 11th when a 70-year-old Dutch passenger became ill and died on the ship. His 69-year-old wife later collapsed at an airport in South Africa and died in a hospital, though authorities have not yet confirmed if the two deaths are connected. The timeline extends to May 2nd, marking the death of a third individual, a German national, while still on board. Currently, 2 crew members are also experiencing respiratory symptoms and require urgent care. Despite multiple deaths and active illnesses, local health authorities have confirmed only 1 official case of hantavirus so far. The geographic separation of the fatalities and the pending diagnostic results indicate an ongoing ambiguous medical situation, rather than a clear, uniform viral cluster. This micrograph displays hantavirus, a rare but serious pathogen that can lead to severe hantavirus pulmonary syndrome. Infections typically begin with fever, fatigue, muscle aches, and headaches. As the disease progresses, patients experience severe respiratory distress, which includes coughing, shortness of breath, and intense chest tightness. The virus is primarily transmitted to humans through contact with rodents, specifically through exposure to the urine, droppings, or saliva of infected rats and mice. This transmission chart highlights a crucial factor. Human-to-human spread is exceptionally rare. Only one specific strain, the Andes virus, has shown any limited ability to pass between people. Because the pathogen relies on an environmental host rather than spreading directly between passengers, health officials emphasize there is no need for panic.
Over a month ago, this vessel began its journey at the edge of the world, departing from the port of Ushuaia, Argentina. It sailed south into extreme isolation, navigating the harsh, freezing waters of the Antarctic Peninsula. After a brief return to port, the ship continued its long transit, hopping between remote islands before finally dropping anchor offshore near Cape Verde. There, the journey stalled. Medical staff identified a single confirmed case of hantavirus on board. Finding a severe pathogen inside the closed system of a luxury vessel forces us to evaluate exactly how their isolation protocols broke down, rather than immediately hitting the panic button. The immediate question is straightforward, but difficult. How does a deadly virus bypass the strict security and environmental controls of a modern cruise ship? Right now, global health authorities, including the World Health Organization, are monitoring the situation and investigating the potential source. Epidemiologists are currently weighing 2 entirely different paths of transmission to explain this isolated outbreak. To understand the actual risk, we have to strip away the alarming headlines and focus strictly on the biological mechanics and the operational timeline of the voyage. Tracking down how this single patient became infected will tell us if there is a fatal flaw in current maritime safety standards, or if this is simply a biological anomaly. The core product these expeditions sell is unrestricted access. Passengers pay for extended, close-up exposure to untouched natural habitats. They spent days walking the icy shorelines, coming into direct proximity with land-based colonies of penguins. The exposure continued on the water, small boats bringing passengers within feet of large marine mammals. And throughout the transit, large flocks of seabirds frequently trailed and interacted with the vessel. Crossing into these remote environments means accepting a biological trade-off. You cannot access wild ecosystems without also inviting their microscopic vectors into your immediate proximity. This brings us to the first theory. Somewhere during a remote docking or resupply run, local rodents contaminated the ship. Hantavirus is almost exclusively contracted when humans breathe in the aerosolized particles from infected rodent droppings or nesting materials. Tracking that kind of environmental exposure backward over a month-long multi-stop itinerary is nearly impossible. If a rodent brought the virus on board, it requires structural sanitization. Crews must rip into the ship's infrastructure to find and eliminate the source. That is a massive logistical hurdle compared to simply isolating an infected passenger in a medical cabin. If the ship itself harbors the vector, the vessel remains an active threat until it is dismantled and scrubbed, a much larger problem than a single sick individual. The competing theory shifts the origin entirely. A single passenger boarded the ship while unknowingly incubating a rare variant of the virus. Pre-boarding medical checks look for common symptoms like fever. Testing every single passenger for extremely rare, latent pathogens would grind travel to a halt. If this theory is correct, the ship's environment is clean. The virus lives and dies entirely with patient zero. This means the vessel's safety protocols performed exactly as designed. The infection is a biological reality that simply outmaneuvered standard screening. To weigh those two theories, we have to look at the clinical profile of the pathogen. This chart shows the danger of a severe hantavirus infection. Approximately 38% of patients who develop respiratory symptoms will not survive. But look at the secondary metric. Despite that lethal severity, the virus almost never spreads from person to person. Researchers are running lab analyses right now to sequence the exact variant involved in this case. High mortality, combined with a near-zero transmission rate, explains the reality of the situation. This is a devastating outcome for one single patient, but it lacks the mechanics to become a broader crisis. That brings us to where the ship sits today. The investigation is still active, and the patient count remains locked at 1. The immediate priority has shifted to logistics, specifically coordinating an offshore medical evacuation. Extracting a patient in critical respiratory distress from a ship anchored off the coast of Africa and flying them to advanced specialized care is incredibly difficult. Meanwhile, health officials have officially stated there is zero risk to the broader public. The primary threat here is geography. The patient is suffering from a time-sensitive illness while trapped thousands of miles away from an intensive care unit. We can map the threat profile into a simple matrix. The risk to the infected individual is high. The risk to the rest of the ship is low. The risk to the globe is 0. For anyone watching from home, this requires absolutely no change in behavior or concern about a new pandemic. But if you are planning an expedition cruise, this event forces you to weigh a very specific trade-off. When you book a trip to the most extreme, untouched corners of the planet, you are purposefully traveling days or weeks away from emergency medical infrastructure. A 5-star dining room and a heated suite on a modern vessel cannot physically insulate you from the biological realities of the natural world. But true exploration requires accepting that risk. For anyone seeking out the deep wild, unpredictable health emergencies will always be part of the contract.